Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Once upon a time, the town of Haven Creek shone with its tranquility. It was a place not found on major road maps, a corner of the world where the seasons seemed to last a little longer than elsewhere. Autumn painted the trees purple and gold, and winter laid a hushed silence on the sloping rooftops. The townspeople all knew each other, or at least claimed to, and the doors were never locked when night fell. Nestled between thick forests and a peaceful river, the town seemed sheltered from the hustle and bustle of the world. Children still rode their bicycles through the alleys at dusk, churches echoed with hymns every Sunday, and shop windows seemed frozen in another era. But what the tourists didn't see was what lay dormant to the north, beyond the rusty old railway. The imposing ruins of the old Holloway Mills textile factory, once the beating heart of the town. With its walls ripped open by time, its windows shattered, its sheds engulfed by brambles, it looked like a wounded beast abandoned in the mist. Some children swore they'd heard it moaning on stormy nights. But the adults simply looked away. For in these ruins, secrets slept. And some inhabitants prayed that they would never awaken. It was there, just a few meters from this stone carcass, that Noah Whitaker, 32, returned after 13 years of absence. He arrived on a gray, late winter morning, driving a worn car with peeling paint, his eyes tired from the miles and the weight of memories. He was no longer the impulsive young man full of dreams of yesteryear. He had become harder, quieter. His shoulders bore grief few could have guessed. He'd left at 19, broken, rejected, engulfed by a scandal from which he'd never recovered. His father, Henry Whitaker, a beloved former mayor and pillar of the community, had been accused of embezzling city funds for fictitious projects. The news had exploded like a bombshell on the streets of Haven Creek. And then, one morning, Henry had been found hanging from a tree in the woods where he'd taken Noah fishing as a child. The shock had been immense. But instead of compassion, the town had turned sour. Whispers, accusations. Some said Noah knew. Others said his little sister, Rachel, might have been complicit. The Whitakers, once adored, had become pariahs in a matter of days. And Noah, unable to face the stares, left without looking back. But today, fate had brought him back to Haven Creek. Margaret, his adoptive mother, a sweet, self-effacing old schoolteacher who had taken him under her wing after the tragedy, was dead. From a discreet cancer, like everything else she did in life. She was the one who had kept his room intact, who still wrote to him at Christmas even when he no longer replied. She had stood where others had turned their backs. She left him her house, a small wooden building with peeling paint, nestled under a large maple tree, a stone's throw from the ruins of the textile factory. Noah stopped in front of the creaking gate. He turned off the engine, but didn't move. The wind made the dead leaves dance along the driveway. He inhaled slowly. Haven Creek had betrayed him, but he had returned. Not for revenge, not to be forgiven, but to understand. Noah's return to Haven Creek didn't go unnoticed. From the moment he arrived, the stares grew heavy, almost menacing. On streets he had once walked carefree, he now felt muffled whispers behind his back, doors slamming shut, faces turning away when he passed someone. He had become a stranger. The first to speak to him was Sheriff Coleman Briggs, a man with features weathered by time and grudges. Once a close friend of his father, he had changed, become harsher, and sometimes bitter. With a cold gaze, he approached Noah on the steps of the sheriff's office and said, without trying to hide his resentment, "You'd better not linger here too long. Some people haven't forgotten, and they're not ready to forgive you." Noah felt a shiver run down his spine, but he simply answered, his voice firm. "I didn't come back to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to find out." But even those he had once loved, those he had thought he could find again, avoided him. Emily Lawson, his childhood sweetheart, the sweet girl who had shared his dreams beneath the old oak tree in the park, now turned her back on him. She had become a schoolteacher, dedicating her life to educating the village children. Every time they met their gaze, she lowered hers. She had changed, and a secret heavier than silence weighed between them. Emily had a 10-year-old son, Joshua, a boy with a shy smile and deep, almost otherworldly green eyes. Eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. Every time Noah met those eyes, he saw a strange resonance with himself. a spark of hope mixed with an ancient pain. A few days after his return, Noah began emptying the house Margaret had left him. It was a modest old building, but full of silent memories. Behind the living room bookcase, a trapdoor hidden under a threadbare rug caught his eye. He carefully lifted it and discovered an old wooden chest, dusty and locked with a simple, rusty lock. With patience mixed with apprehension, he managed to open it. Inside, he found several pieces of paper, yellowed by time. An unfinished letter, scribbled in his father's trembling hand. The words were cut off abruptly, as if the writing had stopped abruptly. Beside it, a worn leather notebook, where Noah found a series of codes, dates, and cryptic notes. On one page, a sentence was underlined several times, almost shouted through the silence. "What I discovered in the factory records is bigger than me." Noah's breath caught for a moment. The sentence sounded like a distant echo of what he had always suspected, buried in his nightmares and hazy memories. His father may not have embezzled the funds. He had discovered something important, something that had earned hatred, betrayal, and ultimately, silence. With the help of his younger sister, Rachel, now a freelance journalist with a tenacious reputation, Noah began digging into the shadows of the past. Quick-witted and fearless, Rachel had always been the one who refused to leave things to chance. Together, they became a team, piecing together the pieces of an ancient puzzle that many had a vested interest in keeping broken. Their first disappointment was to discover that the factory's official records had disappeared, or, more accurately, had been erased from the municipal archives. A carefully orchestrated disappearance. But their determination remained unwavering. They then met Mrs. Langley, a frail, elderly woman who had been a secretary at the factory during the 1980s and 1990s. Living in a small house with blue shutters, she was one of the last living witnesses of that era. Her hands were shaking when she spoke to them, but her voice was clear. In 1991, inspectors came to seize documents. It was a discreet investigation, but, against all expectations, everything was returned shortly after, to the owner. She looked down, hesitant. Richard Conway, a name that still makes this city tremble. Richard Conway, once a business magnate, had built his empire on the desolation of Haven Creek. The mill had been at the heart of his wealth, but also of his shadows. Now gravely ill, he had retired from business. But his son, Ethan Conway, young, elegant, and unscrupulous, had taken up the torch. President of the local bank, owner of half the town's land, he embodied the new generation of power in Haven Creek. Their investigation led them to a charity gala, an event where local high society strutted beneath glittering chandeliers and glitzy outfits. Noah, infiltrated into this world that had always seemed foreign to him, scrutinized the conversations, watching for a sign. He soon overheard a conversation between Ethan Conway and the current mayor, a charismatic man, but clearly under the influence. "Everything has to be kept quiet," Ethan murmured, a cold smile on his lips. "The factory fire, the insurance, the underpaid workers, it's our secret. As long as it stays quiet, our fortune is assured." The mayor nodded, visibly nervous, before replying. "No one will suspect anything. We know how to handle these things." Noah felt the bile rise in his throat. Everything was becoming clear. The Conway fortune was based on massive fraud, hundreds of exploited workers, falsified documents, an arson attack on the factory to destroy the evidence. Later, Noah approached Ethan, calmly, his eyes fixed on his. "You know what I know." Ethan looked at him, amused, without an ounce of fear or doubt. "You have nothing, Noah. Nothing but suspicions of a dead man and a crossed-out notebook. Do you think that's enough?" Noah didn't answer. His gaze slowly shifted to the stage where a children's choir was beginning to sing. Among them was Emily's son, Joshua, smiling shyly, his eyes shining with innocence and hope. This boy, the product of a complicated past, was now at the center of this silent battle. The following days were filled with silence and unspoken words between Noah and Emily. Then, one evening, as the sun set behind the hills of Haven Creek, they found themselves face to face in the small living room lit by the flickering light of an oil lamp. Emily looked down, as if searching deep within herself for courage. Her voice barely trembled when she finally said, "I have to tell you the truth, Noah. What I've kept secret all these years." Noah stared at her, his breath caught. Joshua, he is your son. Shock shot through Noah like an electric shock. His hands tightened on the armrest of the chair. Why have you never spoken to me? Why all this silence? Emily looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. I tried. I wrote to you. I wanted you there. But your mother intercepted my letters. She didn't want you to know. I was afraid. Afraid that this city would break Joshua the way it broke our lives. So I chose to protect him, to keep quiet. Noah felt his heart rip. Yet, deep inside him, a light was turning on. His return to Haven Creek was no accident. Everything was coming together. He straightened up, determination on his face. So I'm going to shed light. For Joshua. For my father. For everyone this city is crushed. With Rachel at his side, they organized a public meeting in the heart of the old community center. The event was quietly announced, and the local press, intrigued, flocked to it. The packed room was filled with excitement. Noah opened the evening with a moving video. A flickering image of an elderly man, his face marked by pain, appeared on the screen. It was Tom Riley, a former factory worker, recorded a few weeks before his death. In a raspy voice, Tom recounted, with courage tinged with regret, how the fire had been orchestrated to silence the truth. How Henry Whitaker, Noah's father, had discovered the extent of the fraud. How he had tried, in vain, to alert the authorities before being threatened and silenced. An icy silence fell over the room as the screening ended. In a corner, Ethan Conway clenched his jaw, trying to hide his confusion. When it was his turn to speak, he tried to deny, to minimize, relying on doubt and fear. But Rachel, with the skill of a seasoned journalist, then produced a thick file. Here's a document we obtained exclusively, the falsified insurance report, signed by Ethan Conway himself. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eyes turned to Ethan, who paled, unable to bear the pressure. The cameras were there, and the regional press was reporting the event live. The case exploded like a bombshell, and for the first time in years, Haven Creek was shaken by a wave of justice and hope. Weeks later, the news came like a thunderclap. Ethan Conway had been arrested. The federal investigation, led by authorities from Washington, revealed a deep-rooted network of corruption that extended far beyond Haven Creek. The evidence, falsified documents, testimony from former workers, and Ethan's direct involvement in the arson was overwhelming. Henry Whitaker's memory was finally rehabilitated. In newspapers and at public meetings, his name was no longer associated with shame, but with the courageous struggle of a single man against the system. A man who had paid the price for truth with his life. On a mild autumn evening, Emily and Noah found themselves in the garden of Margaret's house, where the red leaves danced in the wind. The silence between them was soothing, charged with a new sincerity. Noah was still hesitant to impose himself on Joshua, respecting the fragile balance Emily had patiently built. But as they watched the boy play with Rachel on the lawn, Emily took his hand, gentle and firm. He always wanted to know why his eyes were so green, she whispered with a tender smile. Do you want to explain it to him yourself? Noah's eyes filled with emotion. It was a promise, a new beginning, a bond they would build together, with patience and love. A year later, Haven Creek had changed. The town seemed lighter, as if freed from an old burden. The old textile mill complex, long abandoned and crumbling, had been carefully restored. Transformed into a museum of workers' memory, it had become a living symbol of restored justice and resilience. At the entrance, a large black and white photograph of Henry Whitaker stood proudly, his gaze both gentle and determined, welcoming visitors. Plaques told the story of the workers, past struggles, and the fight for truth that had awakened the city. Noah, Rachel, Emily, and Joshua posed together in front of the restored ruins, now a symbol of rebirth. Their gazes were filled with hope and pride. It was no longer a place of shame or secrets, but a monument to truth, memory, and justice. The wind blew gently, carrying with it the voices of the past, now heard, and the promise that, as long as there were those for whom the truth mattered, Haven Creek would never again sink into oblivion.